Good afternoon, folks. It's Martin Hettwer here from Omnex Europe. I'm the next one scheduled speaker to go over information security management systems for aerospace and for other industries. So if you have any questions, just put them into the chat, and we'll cover them at the end. So give me a moment here just to get queued up on my presentation, and then we'll get started. So just one second. So as I said, my name is Martin Hettwer. I'm the managing director for Omnex Europe. In Europe, we look after essentially four industries: automotive. All right, so maybe that's a little bit better now. Now you can see me and you can see my presentation. So thank you for joining today. And as I said, I hope it's an informative session for you. So one of the standards that changed recently in information security is ISO IEC 27001:2022. And I want to talk today a little bit about how this information security management system and its requirements or best practices can apply for cybersecurity and also for different markets and industries. And we'll see if we can't tie that up in a neat little bow. We're also going to talk about information security controls that are provided in Annex A, which is the back half of the management system 27001, and how those same controls carry over into the information security assessment, something called TISAX or TSAX. TSAX is something that's widely been implemented from the automotive industry, especially for the OEMs in Germany, pushing their supply chain to have an information security management system that allows for the sharing of information. Now, let's think about that in terms of leadership, or in terms of aerospace. The industry does share a lot of information, a lot of designs, a lot of proprietary knowledge, those types of things. And so I think it's very important, or I think that, from an organizational perspective and an industry perspective, that we understand that protecting assets and information is something that we all need to do, regardless of what type of industry we're in. And so I'll go through that a little bit, and I'll explain the relationship. There's also within the standard, and this is something that's not necessarily unique to ISO 27001. We also see it in ISO 9001 and by extension AS 9100, and that is leadership and commitment. That's clause 5.1, and in B in ISO 27001 requires top management to ensure the integration of information security management system requirements into the organization's business processes. So what does that mean? Well, it means exactly what it says it is. That means we take the requirements from all management systems, whether they're AS or AI or ISO 9001 or information security ISO 27001. We take those requirements and we build it into our business management system. No longer should we, because the goal is to have an integrated management system, no longer should we be talking about we have an information management system or quality management system or a health and safety management system or an environmental management system. That was not the intent. That's not the intent of the standards. The intent of the standards, based on the high-level structure of the same 10 clauses, is so that we can integrate them. We can integrate all of those management systems into our business. We should not be talking about a quality management system. We should be talking about a business management system that includes the requirements for all the management system standards that we supply to, whether those are laboratory or energy or social responsibility or quality, it doesn't matter. They should be integrated into the business. This is one thing I'd like you to take away from this discussion today, is consider how has leadership integrated all of these requirements into the business. The other part, the last part of this talk, is to talk about how to reinforce the role of top management and process owners. Right? We know that leaders and process owners exist at all levels of the organization. And so how do the process owners then take these controls and these policies and procedures that we have, integrate them into the business so that we have an effective and efficient information security management system that conforms to ISO 27001:2022. So as I said, my name is Martin Hettwer. I'm the managing director for Omnex Europe. My specialty is integrating management systems. I've also had the pleasure of launching, planning, commissioning, stabilizing, and launching and stabilizing 13 new manufacturing and assembly plants. So I do that around the world. I go around and help clients launch their new products, their new manufacturing, their new assembly facilities. I'm also a project management professional, and one of the things I can say about back in the late 90s is I recognized as a quality manager that all the work I was doing was project management work. And so I switched to project management project management activities, and still kept my certifications for quality and quality excellence. I'm also an internal auditor, and so some of the things that I'll be talking about today is giving you some hints and some points about what I might be looking for as an internal auditor if I was going to come out and audit your facility. If you're interested in TSACs or information security or Agile APQP, Scrum at Scale, or problem-solving methods, or any of the core tools such as PPAP and APQP, as we talked about today, feel free to reach out. And if you want to join me on LinkedIn and Omnex Europe and LinkedIn, please go ahead and do that. All right, so what's the standard say? Here's the new standard, and they changed the name. That's the first thing we need to understand is they changed the name. It's no longer just information security. It's information, cybersecurity, and privacy protection. These are the requirements for the management system for information security. Omnex is a global company. We provide services in at least 5 different industries over 4 regions. So I'm not going to go too much into Omnex history other than to say that wherever you good folks are in the world, we've probably got a facility or a site close by and we can come and help. So one of the things we want to consider about when we put together an information security management system is that we may have multiple sites. And one of the objectives is to integrate that management system over multiple sites. Different sites do different things. And so we have to figure out what is what applies to that site and what applies to the overall or headquartered information security management system. Excuse me. All right, well, how do we do that? Well, it's achievable only through 3 C's: communication, coordination, and collaboration. Keep those 3 things in mind. All right, so what's the problem? Well, the problem is as we look across our sites and our suppliers around the world, we don't have one integrated management system. We don't have integrated, in many cases, we don't have integrated cybersecurity controls. And so one of the things, and like I said, one of the things I always said is that everything I learned about quality and project management, I learned from Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the others. And so, in one site we might have cookies, and the other site we might have muffins. Well, what do we want to do? We want to make sure that we make them as common as possible. May not always be possible, but that's the goal. Is try to have one integrated management system, and where we need to be slightly different in different regions or different sites to make it viable, then we do that. We make those changes, but with the goal and understanding in mind that we want to keep them or make them as common as possible. Well, like any other management system, we need to have a scope. And so this red border defines the scope of which the information security management requirements lie. And so we can see here that because of the high level standard of all the other management systems, we have a lot of the same things: understanding the organization and its context, interested parties' needs and expectations, establishing policies, management review, internal audit, continual improvement, corrective action, risk treatment. All of these things are required in all our management systems. So why would we want to have a different corrective action process for different management systems? Why wouldn't we want to have one integrated management system? And so, this is just a generic one here based on the standard. We can see that the connections and the arrows traveling back and forth between these activities and how they're linked together. And that's what the process map is for. It's to look at those linkages and interactions between those different business processes. Now, we can also take this a little bit further. So one of the things that top management needs to do is they need to assign process owners. If, for instance, if we're talking about IATF, standard for automotive, there is an actual clause in there for process owners, and top management has an obligation to do that. All risks are identified, analyzed, and treated. This is another ISO standard, 31,000, right? So what do we have for our risk management process, right? How do we do risk assessments? How do we do risk management? How do we do risk treatments? Our information security management system is the foundation. It is the foundation for an effective information and cybersecurity controls. You can't expect to have good information security or cybersecurity controls without the basis of an information management system. Here we see in the boxes kind of what's supposed to go into each of those boxes as we're building our system. The first thing we need to have, because we use the process approach, what is the process name? What do we call this SOP for this particular box? Right? What do we call it in our information security or quality management system manual? Who's the process owner? And what's the reference to the standards? And so we want to identify that these standards callouts or clauses are references, right? Because that doesn't necessarily follow the process approach, but we can reference them so that we know we've got everything covered. Now, beyond that box at the top, we also have supporting process controls and standard operating procedure documentation. And so these boxes down below, and there will be many of them, it could be as many as 100 different boxes that talk about each of the specific controls required in Annex A and TSACs, so that we can put together an effective information security management system with adequate controls to protect our assets. So everything down below are the controls. Those controls can be found in the TSACs Information Security Assessment Workbook and also Annex A. And we can say that the TSACs Information Security Assessment Workbook imported or ported in the controls from Annex A. I'm going to skip some of these things other than to say that we're going to talk a little bit more about process owners at the end. So I'm going to skip that over and I'll show you what I mean by this when we have process owner, who owns what when it comes to an information security management system. So the question that I have for you today to think about it is, in terms of information security and the protection of assets with controls, which of those processes do you own? Has top management identified to you that there are specific processes that you are responsible for? And if not, why? Annex A, as we talked about in the standard, is a list of controls. And one of the things that the organization needs to do is they need to go through and identify what those controls are. So the first one we have here is policies for information security. And the control, simply stated, it says information security policy and topic-specific policies shall be defined and approved by management, published and communicated and acknowledged by relevant personnel and relevant interested parties, reviewed at planned intervals. Now, thing is, how many policies do we have? I have clients that have more than 16 policies related to information security. Some only have one. Right? At least the requirement is to have at least one policy around information security, but likely that's not going to be adequate. You're going to have to, there's many things to consider, many controls, so there might be many different policies. Information security roles and responsibilities. Has top management identified who owns what? Simple as that. Has top management identified who owns what and what are their responsibilities? And of course, we know that if we're assigning responsibilities to people, we also have to give them the authority to make things happen. Right? Segregation of duty, management responsibility, all of those things are controls. And there's 93 different controls in Annex A. That's the latest count. So when you come to my house, we have German Shepherds, and they're out in the backyard. The scope around the information management system, or the scope around the system, is the fence. Everything inside the fence we say is in scope. Everything that is outside of the fence is out of scope. It belongs to somebody else. The German Shepherds don't mind if things come over the fence, a frisbee, a football, a rabbit, a raccoon, a skunk. They don't mind. They don't mind if those things come over or under the fence. What they don't like is when that thing tries to leave from inside the fence. Then they have to go through a change management process. And sometimes there's a bit of a fight of whether or not those assets can leave from inside the fence. And so the same thing has to happen with our information security management system and our quality management system and our health and safety and environmental management system. We have to understand what's in scope versus what is out of scope. It's very important. And who's going to protect those things that are in scope? Who's going to take care of them? Who's going to own them? Who's going to analyze the risks? Determine our organizational assets that require protection with controls. And so we have some examples here. We have intellectual property. We have our company financials. We may have code and architecture that we need to take care of. Customer-owned tools and data. That's obvious, right? It's not ours. We should protect it. We should protect customer-owned information or assets with even greater concern than we protect our own assets. Personal data. Nobody wants to have a data breach. Product designs. Proprietary process secrets, right? Those process secrets is what we need to have so that we can produce these products for our customers. If the customer knew what our process was or what our proprietary secrets were, they wouldn't need us. They just go and do it themselves. So, we have to evaluate their process or their product designs to make sure that we can make them. And then we have to use our trade secrets and process knowledge and organizational knowledge to deliver on those requirements that are spec'd out by the customer. There's some other ones. Testing results. What happens if your test results got into the wrong hands? Worse yet, what happens if you had a test result and it failed? What if you had a failed test result or report and that got out into the public eye? What kind of damage to reputation might happen? We've got program budgets. Obviously, if your budget became public knowledge, then somebody would know how to bid on your products. We might have unique software applications. We may have supplier data, right? So if you lose the access to that supplier data, it could be that somebody else picks up one of your suppliers, and then you've got one less place to buy something from. Delivery schedules, component designs, process controls, and of course, best practices. What's best practice? So these are assets or examples of assets that require protections with controls. What are those controls? Now let's look at those. There are a bunch. There are organizational controls and there are technical controls, and sometimes those controls are both. They can be organizational and they can be technical. So in terms of a prevention control, we might have multi-factor authentication when we log into our emails. That prevents somebody from getting onto our email or hacking into our email and taking over or pirating what we have there. We might have a deterrence control. That could simply be the fence that runs around the outside of the building, the barbed wire on the top to deter somebody from getting onto the site. We might have detection controls, right? Could be a camera system or door alarms or something that monitors vibration, something to detect an abnormality or something changing. We have backups in our information security systems. Those could be recovery controls. We could also have some other type of fields or functions that actually autocorrect. They autocorrect themselves. So if you type in the wrong information in the field, it says, no, that's not right. We wanted a phone number, not an email address, right? So simple things like that. Of course, monitoring is there. There may be many different types of monitoring devices. And of course, awareness, right? The standard doesn't call for training. It calls for competence and awareness. And it's the lazy auditor that only looks at training. We have a good colleague here this week. And he once made a mistake of saying to leadership that they needed to do more training, and they got slapped pretty good. And that slap that they got was what it still hurts me today, because the executive said, no, animals are trained, people we educate. Animals are trained, people we educate. So training is not the be-all, end-all of developing competence and awareness. It is only part of that. Experience, knowledge, skills, all those other things goes into determining whether or not somebody's competent. And so when we decide to roll out a process or upgrade our process, we have to determine what are the competency and awareness requirements for those people doing that job, for those process owners, those risk owners, right? Those admin people that do the work on a day-to-day basis. Aerospace, AS9100D requirements related to ISO 27000K. Well, we have infrastructure, right? What do we have for our information technology infrastructure? We have documented documented information that we need to maintain. We have organizational knowledge. We saw that as an asset that needs to be protected. We've got requirements for products and services. Obviously, we review those, we agree to those, and then we go forward, right? We integrate those requirements into our product and process. We've got handling of customer property. And then again, as I said earlier, for information cybersecurity, we also have the standard ISO 27001. So it's related. There is a relationship between these things in our quality management system requirements and the AS requirements, or pending AI requirements, that relate right back to 27001 2022. And I think our preceding speakers talked about a need for information security is coming up with the next standard revision. Protecting our design IP and our assets, protecting from design failures. We may not be design responsible, but when their failure occurs, how do we communicate what we found back to the OEM or back to the people that are design responsible? It wasn't that long ago we had a failure in the Dreamliner grounding where there was an issue with the batteries. Even the exuberance should have a contingency plan. Right? What is our contingency plan? And have we tested our contingency plan to make sure that we can still deliver our products to the customer? Right? That's our backup or our contingencies. Avoiding potential flight anomalies. We have requirements to do FMEAs, process FMEAs, or at least to look at the design FMEAs from our customers. With table 4.2 in the PPAP manual says we have to submit the DFMEA for our PPAP. It's in there. We either retain it or we submit it by choice of the customer. Sorry, there's just a little bit of discussion in the background, and I may have misquoted myself. Dave was saying that there is no reason, if you're not design responsibility, no reason to have a DFME. All I'm saying is table 4.2 is on the checklist, says that you either submit it or you retain it. That's the point of contention here. But anyways, we're not going to solve that issue today, other than to know, and all of those things in PPAP are negotiable. Every one of those items is negotiable, and so all we have to do is speak with the customer.
Go on.
So, and of course, for most of us, for our proprietary processes, we need to have a process FMEA. The question is, how good is our FMEA? Right? Does it protect us? Does it have adequate prevention to protect us from costly or repeated part failures? Wasn't that long ago that hackers breached the National Security Agency administration, right? They got into to the Department of Energy, which controls, of course, the U.S. nuclear stockpiles. If that agency can get hacked, then there's a good chance that the rest of us can get hacked. And so the question is, because many of us work in silos, that how effective or how good are the controls on those silos? How do we keep secure lid on all of our important business assets? A couple of interesting things. Have we ever panicked when we misplaced or lost our mobile device or our laptop? Of course, how do we recover from that? Did we forget some type of special prototype part in the boot of the rental car because there was two people and both individuals thought that they were the ones that had that prototype part? Legal requirements. We touched on this just a few minutes ago. So we have our FAR requirements, the Federal Acquisition Requirements, 52-204-21, and then we have our defense FAR requirements on top of that. And on top of that, it builds with the NIST requirements. And so if we go along the other side, we also have our ISO 27001 for protection, and that leads into CMMC level 1 and level 2. And those levels are tied right back to the FARs and the DFARs. And there's also level 3 coming soon. Also said we're going to talk a little bit about TISAX. So in terms of the Trusted Information Security Assessment Exchange, there's a marriage there that happened, or at least they were engaged together with information security back in 2013. They've been married together since 2017. So what is it? So TISAX, it's a part of an information security assessment, which is a tool that can help us see the risks and prevent the loss of our assets. Yes, non-automotive companies can register for TISAX. Doesn't mean that that you have to be automotive. Any company that shares information between their suppliers and their customers should have a process, a robust process for making sure that that information or those assets are not impacted by a loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability. So regardless of what standard we follow, there is that relationship. And of course, the latest TISAX information security assessment that was just released last week is the 6.01 version of that. So we can do it. If it's something that interests us as an organization to have a robust information security management system with robust controls, then that might be one way of going. Not saying that it's absolutely necessary. In different industries, it is necessary by their customers, but in aerospace, not yet specifically applied. There are some goals, some additional protection needs and objectives, and those are related to the must and should requirements of the standard of the information security assessment workbook, let's call it that way. Confidentiality and integrity and availability are the three that are out there. There are also some controls with very high protection needs and some with high protection needs. So the guess or the question that I might ask is, what's the difference between those two? So for very high protection needs, that is personally protected information, right? So where we have legal requirements for personally protected information, that's very high. If we have something like prototypes that we're building for our customers, well, those have high protection needs. We also have to go through a statement of applicability based on the Annex A and the TISAX controls, which apply and which don't apply. And so the example here is an automotive example. It says, to what example are predefined camouflage regulations implemented for project members? And in this case, this particular supplier has no access to vehicles that require camouflage controls. And because it doesn't apply to them, because they don't have access to prototype or pilot vehicles, we can write them out of the statement of applicability. It does not apply. But if we do something, it does apply. If it is something that is part of our daily operations, then we can't necessarily scope it out. At least not without a darn good reason to do so. And so we see here a list of the controls. The Annex A controls are listed down the left-hand side. And this is the older standard out of 2013. And this company has decided that they would determine whether it's applicable or not, yes or no. Right? And what is the reason? Is it related to legal requirements or contractual obligations, business requirements, or the results of risk assessments? So the company has to go through that and determine whether or not those controls are applicable or relevant. There is a food chain. There is a food chain. So we've got aerospace companies that may also consume automotive suppliers. We know of many of the different aerospace companies that also supply through different divisions automotive products. And those automotive products are then being further demands to have an information security management system or a TISAX label. First thing we need to know from the customer is, what is the specified TISAX label? And so there's typically it's a label of 2 or 3, but they are customer specified. But more than that, even though we know what the desired label is from the customer or our external interested parties, there's also the internal wants. What do we want as an organization to ensure that we have good information and cybersecurity? What level would we want to go for, or what maturity level we expect? And so Craig mentioned a few moments ago about the aerospace maturity model. Well, the same maturity model applies for TISAX. We also see it in other standards like ASPICE. We see the same type of maturity models being brought up. In this case, for information security, we want to see a level 3, and I'll show you what the level 3 here is in just a moment. So, who defines what secure means? In our case, or in standards like ISO 27001, that's about our information security management system, and it requires us to establish, and this is an interesting phrase, state-of-the-art way to securely handle confidential information. So where are we? Do we have an information security management system? And is it well prepared, or does it have the ability to securely handle not only our confidential information, but also the assets we need to do business? Right? That's really up to us to decide how good are our controls. What is the state-of-the-art way that we have to handle those assets and information? Why is it important, and is it mandatory? Well, one of the things we can see in the organizational controls is that opportunities can lead to the adoptions at the bottom of the sheet here for AS 9100D. Note 2 says opportunities can lead to the adoption of new practices, launching new products, or opening new markets, addressing new customers, building partnerships, and using new technology or other desirable and viable opportunities to address the organization's and customers' needs. So there is a direct connection between AS 9100 and information security. And by extension, information security management becomes mandatory, because if you're supplying the industry and a customer that demands that you have it, it is mandatory. You can't get around that. So it's something to consider. Maybe your customers are not asking for it now, but that doesn't mean they couldn't ask for it in a year or 6 months down the road. We don't know that. We don't have a crystal ball, but we can think about that. And we can think whether or not from a leadership standpoint or a management standpoint, is this something that we want to do? Is this something that we want to prepare for? So why do we need a TISAC certification or controls? Well, to protect our organizational assets, to protect the customer and combined intellectual property from threats of loss, to protect the organization from violating legal compliance or regulatory items. Right? We don't want Judge Judy getting upset. We also want to protect from security breaches, threats, or damage to critical equipment. It wasn't that long ago that somebody hacked Iran's nuclear program and attacked their centrifuges that they used for processing uranium. They actually got into the information system, or into the IT network, and they were able to spin up the centrifuges to a point where they burned them out. And because of the treaties, they weren't. Iran was not able to go back to the manufacturers of the centrifuges in Germany to buy replacement parts. So basically, turned these very, very expensive centrifuges into bricks. Right? So how is our network protected so that people can't access key pieces of our equipment and damage those or sabotage those key pieces of equipment? It's also very difficult to steer direction and gain traction if we want to push TISACs without first having the framework or the foundation of an information security management system. What's leadership stating here, right? Are they putting the cart in front of the horse? Right? Are they saying we only want TISACs? We only want TISACs without doing ISO 27001, or the other way around? We only want an information security management system and we don't care about TISACs. Don't know. We don't know what the customer might ask for, or what the organization might want to do in the future, 6 months down the road, a year down the road. As I mentioned to you a little bit earlier, there is a free public download. It is available on the ENX website. You can go there now, but these assessments are only going to be valid after 2024. Until that time, you can still use version 5 of the assessment. And again, it's a self-assessment that you want to do. You need to do that self-assessment, but you need to do it honestly and fairly, right? You don't want to you don't want to give yourself credit for things that aren't in the best light, or not necessarily effective. There's a handbook. There's a handbook out there. I'm not going to go through the aspects here, but it's there to help you or to ensure that you fulfill your partner's request for information security. Inside the information security assessment workbook, which is basically an Excel-based workbook that's put out by the VDA in conjunction with ENX, there are 3 tabs. There are 3 workbook tabs in there. The first one is in information security, which should apply to everybody. The next one is on data protection. Now, we may not hold on to or process personally protected information, and so the tab for data protection may not apply. And then prototypes. If we don't do any prototypes or we have none to protect, then that wouldn't apply either. So, but at least we need to look at the information security assessment tabs. All right, well, how does that work? Well, in that workbook, there are a bunch of control questions. We'll talk about the number here in just a moment, but there are requirements. There are requirements that must be met, and there are some requirements that should be adopted. And with any other standard, we have to understand the question. We have to understand the objective of each control question. What is that? What is the objective? What is the intent? What is the focus area? And that's a very good tool for auditors, is to figure out whether or not the auditee has actually met the intent or covered the focus area. And as I said earlier, there are sub processes out there for high protection needs and very high protection needs. Again, high protection needs would be for prototype. Very high protection needs is for personally protected information. So here, and I know you can't read it, it's an eye chart, but this is just the tab straight out of the information security assessment. And so what it does is it lists those questions, it lists the objective, it lists the must and the should requirements. It also gives you an opportunity to assess your maturity level. Level 3 is the minimum level. If you actually met and you've met all the requirements of level 3, it's going to go green. If not, right? If it's less than that and you type in a 2, it's going yellow. If you type in a 1 or a 0, it's going to go red to tell you that there's a significant gap here. And one of the nice things about this assessment is that there's also a column there that tells you specifically what Annex A controls from the standard are applicable. And it talks about the 2013 standard and it talks about the 2022 standard. And so you can quickly cross-reference those or these questions to those specific controls within Annex A of those standards. It's very interesting how you're able to do that and to do it rather quickly. So as I mentioned earlier, for TSACs, we have information security assessment model levels, maturity levels, and level 3 is established, and that is the minimum level that we want to have. Obviously, if there's nothing there, it's incomplete. If we've just got the framework here and we're doing something, we could say it's performed. 2 is managed, but 3 is unique in so much as that we need to be able to show performance data. We have to have some type of monitoring or measuring metrics, and we have to be able to show that we are on plan or on target. And it's, of course, the process owner that will report on whether or not we're meeting those targets. Now, again, that's kind of the minimum level. So there's also level 4, which is predictable, and level 5 is optimized, right? And so it's really up to the organization to decide, do we only want to do the minimum for information security and cybersecurity? Or do we want to have a system that's robust to protect us in now and in the future? Is it predictable? Is it optimized? And so again, we can see these same levels being shown in other standards like ASPICE and CMMC and in AIM, right? Mm-hmm. And we've got in the back of the workbook, we've got the questions, right? And so it gives you an opportunity to plug in what your results are. At least if you've done them on the main sheet, it'll auto-populate the back sheets here so that you can have a record that you can print out. What is the current answer to the question and what is the maturity level? All right, Annex A. There are essentially 4 separate sections in Annex A, each one with a number of controls. The new 2022 section has 37 controls for the organization, 8 for people and human resources, 14 that are physical, and 34 that are technical related. So there's a total of 93 different controls, and those are spread across the different departments. They're spread across the different departments or different functions, right? We can't forget about purchasing and legal, and we can't forget about DevOps as well. As I mentioned earlier about individuals, we can see here based on the number of areas of controls that some of these controls relate to different areas, and some of them are shared. So everything that's green might be related to cybersecurity or operations or development things. The purple ones are human resources. We've got purchasing over here. We've got legal compliance. So we need to consider the implementation of an information security management system, not something that is exclusive just to IT or information security. That's not going to work. It's not going to fly, people. We need to involve the entire organization in making sure that we have implemented an effective and efficient system. You can't do it alone. You're not going to be successful doing it alone. We have to bring in the people. We have to bring in all of those relevant interested parties and stakeholders and work on a plan so that we implement the right things. And of course, driven by the right department. Obviously, HR has 8 controls. They need to drive those, but they may need support from others to get that done. Right? For instance, access controls. And so here we see the shared controls, same number, 93. But if we look across how many of them are shared, there's the point, right? Some of these controls can be shared by multiple departments. And so we have to figure that out. We have to come up with some kind of RASIC chart that says who's responsible, who's accountable, who gets informed, who has controls, right? So we need to define who that is as part of that plan, that implementation plan. And of course, it's signed back to specific process owners identified by top management. As I said earlier, there's a TISAX participant handbook, and we want to make sure that we have an integrated information security and cybersecurity plan that meets the requirements of ISO 27000-2022. And again, the question is it chicken or egg and chicken? Well, we've got the Annex A controls, which comes first. Do we do the management system first, or do we do the control first? Well, I think it has to be looked at individually, right? What do we have available? What do we not have available? And that's where you might want to call somebody like Omnex to come in to do a gap assessment to figure out what controls you have, what policies, what procedures you have, and then we come up with a plan of what we still need to implement or what we need to improve upon. We need to do risk assessment. These standards are very heavily vested in risk assessment, and there are many different ways to do that. And this is one that we've seen here in the aerospace industry used a bit, and we can use it for information security as well. This bow tie risk analysis method. And so we have on the left side, we have the threats to the information security management system, and on the right side, we have the consequences if we fail to prevent those risks from happening. And so the risk itself is the access to the user email, right? So that's one of the things. Well, how do we do that? Well, we can put in some barrier shields. We might have malware detection. We might have handshake protocols over the network. We might have spam filters so that those emails don't come in at all. The user never sees them. Multi-factor analysis for emails, right? We can also do some training on the other side. We can do some user awareness so they don't click on the wrong things. We can have some password protocols. Now, the question that we have is, what is the risk if a barrier control fails to work? So we've been talking for the last few minutes on controls. The risk is that we have a control. The question is, how effective is the control? If that control were to fail, what would be the consequence? What would be the consequence to the organization and its assets if the controls that we have in place are ineffective or are not preventive in nature? What happens when somebody gets into the system and does something malicious to the system? Is it a malware attack? Is somebody's email get hacked? Do we lose a critical piece of equipment because somebody's hacked into the PLC? What is that? What's the risk and the impact and the consequences of something if our barrier controls fail to work? And so this is a nice, neat way for people to look at specific events or specific risks and decide, right? What is that? What is the consequence, and what is the threat to the organization? Excuse me. All right, so last slide here. Leadership role, steering committee for integrated management systems. What do they need to do? The first thing they need to understand is to steer the team, right? What's the objective? How do we align our information security management system with the strategic objectives of the organization? Again, like all other management systems, top management is there to assign process owners with controls and assign risk owners. Well, now that we've identified that we have a risk, who's going to own that risk to make sure that we take care of that? We're going to put in place objectives. We're going to put in smart way objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely. Is it worthwhile? Who's going to be accountable? And what do we expect it to yield? And people always forget the way. They always forget the second half. We look at the objectives from the SMART perspective, but we always forget the second half. As we mentioned in the very first slide, we do that through collaboration, communication, and coordination of resources. So top management and the steering committee has some work to do, has some ownership and some work to do. Generally speaking, we break the TISAC certification process into two phases: preparation and certification. The first thing we need to do, because TISAC is built on information security management controls, is to put in place our ISMS. And we're going to look at 27001 and Annex A. The second part of that is we may choose to self-certify or certify to that management system. Then we need to register with an external. Can we take that up in the questions, please? Thank you. And the last one to do is to pursue our TISAC label to whatever label we've decided that we need, or whichever one the customer has said, you need to go after. And that's it. Here's my contact information. So take a picture of the screen here. As I said earlier, if you want to know anything about information security management system or TISAC or Agile APQP or any one of the other 400 courses and services that we provide, you can reach out and contact me here directly. So take a screen grab, and if there's anything that you need or you're interested, just let us know.